Welcome to Fields of Change, an audio video series brought to you by the Foundation for Agrarian Studies. In the lead up to the FAS International Conference on Agrarian Change to be held from November 6 to 9, 2025 in Trivandrum, Kerala, India, we bring you conversations with leading scholars on major themes around agrarian change, including land and labor, rural living standards, science and technology in agriculture, and the impact of climate change. In part 3b, we continue the discussion on science and technology in agriculture with Professor Ramakumar. In recent years, there's been a surge of interest in alternatives to modern science, such as natural or traditional farming approaches, some of which reject scientific methods altogether. How should we critically engage with these trends, particularly in light of the need for both sustainability and higher productivity?
There is a surge of interest in policy circles, international organizations, funding agencies, and so on, in favor of new methods of natural farming, traditional farming, and so on. You see a lot of talk related to agroecology, natural farming, Vedic farming, indigenous practices, and so on and so forth. They are, in some sense, at least in the public eye, represented as a critical reaction to the downsides or the adverse impacts of conventional agriculture, as they would call it, which would be external input-driven industrial kind of agriculture. So they are posed as an alternative. They are posed as a counter to some of these conventional scientific methods of cultivation that we have. Now there are issues that have contributed to this, which is, for example, there is a wide misconception in my view, but a view that is prevalent nevertheless, that there is enormous overuse of pesticides, fertilizers, etc. In agriculture, which is leading to different kind of environmental damages. Now, what is the problem here? The problem here is not the fertilizer by itself. The problem is not the chemical or pesticide by itself, but about how it is applied. Now, there is a scientific package of practice that is available from the Indian Council for Agricultural Research or state agricultural universities in each state as to in what proportion and quantity must these chemicals be applied. They very clearly say that there should be organic matter applied in the beginning. Then after that, there should be a certain quantum of application of fertilizers at certain intervals. Then use of pesticides prescribed in a particular way. But all these recommendations are available on paper, but because of the last 30 years, the way we have destroyed our agricultural extension system, particularly the public sphere, the awareness or the information or knowledge about these scientific practices which are prescribed by scientific institutions have not reached the farmer. The farmer is many times not aware of it. So they end up using more fertilizers, thinking that it will provide them more yields, or they apply more pesticides, thinking that the pests would be so completely exhaustively eliminated from the field, and so on. But that's not true. It doesn't happen like that, and it has many adverse impacts also. So the breakdown of the public agricultural extension system has contributed to a form of practice of agriculture, which is sometimes called scientific, but not exactly scientific, because there are a lot of variations from what is a scientific practice. So this has created a certain kind of an image of an agriculture which is deeply environmentally damaging. And so forth. And it is into this gap that these alternatives have crept in, agroecology or natural farming, and so on and so forth. So it's important that we see the particular context in which these new alternatives are coming. This has also become an ideology in itself. There are cultural relativist groups or right-wing groups who have latched on to these anti-science or pseudoscience based alternatives, and they have tried to normalize it including incorporating them into public policy and so on. If there is an alternative that somebody is putting forward, the question to ask immediately is whether this can be scientifically validated or not. That is a very crucial point. We must ask that rigorous question to all these propagators of alternative farming. Now, whatever variety it may be. Now, we must ask them, where is the data? Where is the data that is scientifically or statistically appropriately collected and which has shown the superiority of this new alternative that you are tom-toying? Where is the replicable data? If you replicate this in another sample, will you get a similar result? We should not accept anecdotes, anecdotal examples of success in one farm or one region as conclusive. Are yields more predictable when you replicate the sample experiments? Do they provide similar results across different agroecological zones or regions or soils or climates, etc.? Is it scalable? If a practice works in a small 1 acre farm, can it be also applied in a 10-acre farm? Will the results be different? Will the productivity change? Right. Similarly, what are the trade-offs in this whole issue that we are dealing with? If you completely reject all pesticides, you might have lower yields, but also require significantly more labor to do some of these operations. That's a higher price that the farmer will have to pay. Are you willing to pay that higher price to support that trade-off? That is another question that we need to ask. Basically, what we need to do is to ask people to scientifically validate some of these alternatives that are being put forward. They are, of course, based on pseudoscience or the absence of science in multiple ways. But because they have deeply embedded themselves in the public mind, you have to very carefully sort of approach these arguments in ways that are scientifically rigorous, but also appealing to the sensibilities of people. So that's something that is very important in this.
Why is it important for progressive social science today to engage more deeply with the transformations taking place in agricultural science and technology? And what role can it play in meeting the key agricultural challenges of the future, especially in developing countries like India?
Again, a very difficult question, because any question that asks me to speculate about the future is immediately a problematic one, because we don't know how things will pan out. But let me start with a simple point of why this is important. Because agriculture is a very important sphere of economic activity, particularly in the developing part of the world. It is not just an important economic activity per se, it is also a very important site of social struggle in developing countries. This is because agriculture involves land, and who controls land and other means of production is something that determines who controls food production. Or what determines food production, right? So we know that from an earlier era of more common property resources and so on, we now are, for the last few centuries, in a capitalist era of private property rights in land, and increasingly land is concentrated in a few hands, right? And different technologies are being barricaded by intellectual property rights also. Right? So put all these things together, and we will see that what happens in agriculture is also an indicator of how the balance of power is shifting, how class relations are being transformed, how social structure or social formations are being reshaped. Right. So it is very important that progressive social scientists must engage with the issues that we are talking about. Now, if that is very important on the side of means of production and production relations, it is equally important to note that there is a challenge of food production that we have. in the next few 1 or 2 centuries. The world population, for example, is very likely to cross 10 billion and reach 11 billion. And that means that we'll have much, we'll require to produce a much higher levels of food grains that we produce today. We will also have to produce much higher levels of production of milk, meat, egg, fish, etc., which are supplements therein, which means that we require land for production of all these crops. We need land to be released from some of the existing crops to new crops or new activities allied with agriculture, which means that you can release land to other crops or other activities only if the productivity per unit of land increases in the current land. So, for example, if you want to have large-scale cultivation of millets in India, which is increasingly argued to be a very important nutritional source, where will the land for millets come from? It has to be released from the land currently cultivated with rice and wheat. If that has to happen without a reduction in the production of rice and wheat, which is possible only if we substantially raise our productivity of rice and wheat. Only then will we be able to release land to new crops like millets or even for vegetables, fruits, etc. So, which means that even if you want a more diverse, nutritionally diverse cropping pattern, which is aligned with what some people argue to be a food systems perspective, you require a very sharp increase in productivity in agriculture, which means that you need new technologies which will allow that to happen, which will immediately take me to the question of who owns that technology. Right. So technology then becomes power itself or a source of power. So the earlier power relations that I mentioned, which are related to land, become more complicated if you put it together with who controls or owns the technology that is required to increase production and productivity in that particular land. So basically, we need to reframe this question itself in the new era. We need critical social science, progressive social science, to think more about control over land, control over technology, etc., and also investments in public agricultural science, which will allow you to not just have seeds with high productivity, but also seeds which will be resilient to shocks of climate. Right. That's again, the climate resilience is again something that the private sector is very unlikely to be interested in. It will be only the public sector that will develop those technologies, which means that land as a source of power, technology as a source of power, investment in agricultural science in the public sphere, all these will have to be a very important area of concern for progressive social scientists. And a supplementary job for them will be to kind of consistently, from a scientific, rational point of view, resist the inroads made by pseudoscience or the different alternative agricultures that you mentioned into this sphere, and basically defeat the whole social purpose of progressive social science itself.